Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 23 of the Future of Work show, where all through 2020, we've been inviting leading academics and leading practitioners for some very interesting conversations around practices and ideas that are going to affect all of our futures. We've had several interesting conversations around topics as diverse as liquid organizations and what does it mean for organizations and organizational leaders to be liquid, to conversations around is there a role that exercises in business improv themselves can play in being prepared for situations that actually change very rapidly? We've also had some really interesting conversations around what is it actually like to use design thinking, not just for a customer experience, but for an employee experience creation, and so on. We've done 22 episodes, so we really have a library of conversations. And if you're interested in the future of work, I do encourage you to take a look at some of those conversations. I'm sure you'll find several that are very interesting for wherever you are and whatever it is that you're working on. Now, for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, I'm Shalini Lal, and I work at the intersection of people and organizations and the future of work. As you know, if you're interested in the topic, the world is changing so fast that the organizations we work in and the kind of leadership and culture that will be needed for the future is going to look very, very different. And that's really the area that I focus on, both as an educator and as an advisor. And now for the topic of the day. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic for which there are very few people whom I come across who have the expertise to discuss crowdsourced innovation and what that means for the gig economy. And I'm going to bring on my guest, Mr. Milan Rao, who's the president of Wipro Limited. And he's just going to be on in a few seconds.
Hello.
Hi, Milan. A very good morning to you.
Thank you. And it's a very good but very, very chilly morning. We're in the midst of a snowstorm here in New York, but really happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. I know it's 7 a.m. So, you've really made the time for us. I really appreciate it. Um, it's also a cold Delhi day. Let me share that.
Okay.
It's an extremely cold Delhi day. And, we've all got heaters in our rooms out finally. So, no snowstorm, but a lot of bitter cold here as well.
So that's the interesting thing, Shalini, because earlier when we used to have a conversation, we'd discuss the weather. What's the weather here? What's the weather here? Or we're in the same place. Today, when we have a larger conversation, so what's the weather like in Delhi? What's the weather like in Bangalore, it's like this. In Chicago, it's like this. In New York, it's like this. In London, it's like this. So, the weather conversation itself can take 10 minutes of your time on call. but,
That's
but
true.
that's the way the work is now. It's dispersed across the globe, really. Different people at different places, sometimes faceless, even, but it is rapidly changing.
I know. Milan, firstly, I'm really excited for our conversation today. And, one of the things I was looking up on your LinkedIn profile was you speak about your interest in digital transformation, innovation. And can I ask you what got you interested in these topics?
Well, first, the nature of the job. I think that's always a good starting point. But I think, there's an innate liking and understanding and passion for technology. And during the course of my career, I've been very fortunate. I started with a consumer goods company, and then I spent a lot of time in financial services, then moved to telecom and then healthcare. And now I'm in IT and technology. I feel that, I can leverage the conversations and the experiences that I've had in these multiple industries. But the thread of what is taking these industries forward is technology and IT. And I would argue engineering services too, which a lot of IT companies do. So, how do you really take forward what's going to happen for all of these companies? How do these companies scale? How do these companies transform? Is really led by technology. And I feel very fortunate to be at a point of time where I'm at the intersection of
Mm.
technology and industry. You talk about intersection of people and organizations too. So I'm at an intersection of technology and industries, and I think that I find very fascinating.
No, it really is, and it really is. I can think of very few topics which are as fast changing
Right.
and where there's just so much to learn every single day just to understand, the mega trends that are unfolding as we live our work lives.
Right.
So, Milan, I think one of the areas I'm especially interested in asking questions around is crowdsourced
Mhm.
innovation.
Mhm.
And as you'd mentioned, Topcoder is part of the Wipro family at this point, and
Right.
Topcoder has been a leading organization on crowdsourced innovation, competitive programming. Is that would that be an
Yeah,
active
sure.
emphasis?
Well, I think I would just say, anything that is development oriented, where you really need people to come together, ideate, and create, is really where Topcoder fits in. So crowdsourcing obviously is huge. It's been huge for a very long time. I mean, I have to tell you this, and not a lot of people know this, but
Mm.
one of the initial problems of crowdsourcing was set about by the British Parliament in 1714, which is
Really?
to define the longitude problem, yeah, at sea. So sailors, did not really know where they were. And, it was a huge, big problem because, at that point of time, everything was by sea. And the dominance really of those economies at that time was by sea. And it wasn't an astrologer, it wasn't a mathematician who came up with a solution. It was a watchmaker named John Harrison. And he actually solved the problem, and that really led to tremendous progress and people understanding, how to navigate, where to navigate, and where they were in the world. So crowdsourcing has been around for a very long time. The Sydney Opera House architecture design was done by crowdsourcing. The iconic Toyota logo was crowdsourced. Right here, the Central Park layout was actually crowdsourced too. So I believe that a lot of, coming to Topcoder, a lot of ideation, design, rapid iteration work that we talk so much about nowadays is all part of the DNA of Topcoder, right? So when you have a very large community and you need to set that together, you can fork out work to that community depending on the expertise of that community. And the community comes together to solve a problem. Now, software is complex. Software writing and code writing is complex, but it can be all software programs can and projects can be broken down into smaller streams of things to be done, right? So somebody can be looking at design, somebody can be looking at testing, somebody can be looking at app development, and like a plumber is not an electrician, right? Each of these sets of people have a different level of expertise, high expertise, but a different level of expertise and a passion towards working. So if you have the ability to break down the projects and programs into each of these areas, and experts come and solve those areas, that's really where crowdsourcing for enterprises like Topcoder does really comes into fore. So you're essentially tapping into expertise, degree of
Yeah.
passion for software development, and you need a platform like a Topcoder to actually make it run.
But see, Topcoder has been an extremely successful organization,
Mhm.
and there are many other sort of two-sided platforms of this kind that
Right.
you know that were attempted, including one by Amazon,
Mhm.
Film Scripts,
Mhm.
and a few others around product development. Uh, Yet the success has been uneven. So I'm
Right.
wondering if you can share what is it that creates a successful crowdsourced innovation platform? What does one have to get right?
Well, I think you need to get scale, right? It's very, very. It's all about the people, right? I mean, Topcoder has 1.6 million people
Yeah.
on the platform, and that's a huge amount. Secondly, you need to come to a platform where there are challenges galore, right? You can theoretically create a platform in a very niche area, and it will work, but it will only attract the people who are in that niche area.
Mhm.
So if you're going to do only, let's say, um, app development work, as an example, or if you're in product testing, so you're trying to do one particular area. You will attract a lot of people in that area, but it is still very limited. So you need to have a platform wherein you can actually do very, very different kinds of work. Now, one of the reasons why Topcoder has been very successful, and I would argue that there are a few other successes, so Topcoder is not the only one.
Yeah.
But where these are successful is that the projects are very interesting, right? They're very diverse and they're very new and innovative. And I think that's really what attracts a lot of people to platforms like Topcoder, that you have the ability to go out there, look at work which is incredibly exciting, cutting edge, and be able to solve problems which have not been attempted. I mean, where would you be able to go and work for a program for a British Telecom, an Adobe, a Johnson and Johnson, for NASA, for Harvard, for it's just absolutely everything across the world, so to speak. And I think that's the other part of the challenge, that people are able to work for companies that they admire. So you may be working somewhere else, but you can actually go and work on a project for a company that you really admire or you really follow, or in an area that you really follow. So that's the second one. Today's realization is that people don't have only one skill. And in particularly in technology and in the niche areas of technology, there are multiple skills. But here's the deal. Somebody is working on infrastructure in cloud, but also understands, cloud application development,
Mhm.
but is not able to do that in the current job, right?
Mhm.
So they have the ability to go on a platform like Topcoder and solve some really cool problems and ideas on application development on cloud, right? So it enables you to do things which you're really passionate about, multi-skilled, right? That's the second one. The third one is that you get to do, really, really innovative, sometimes even crazy ideas. I mean, recently we did something with Harvard Medical, which was enabling radiologists to correctly and hopefully much more accurately identify scans wherein there is a greater propensity for cancer,
Mhm.
right? Now, these are algorithms. And algorithms, once you curate the algorithms, can actually be developed by anybody else. And we actually created, so Topcoder actually came out with multiple solutions, but a few of the solutions were such that they gave greater than 90% accuracy in determining that there was indeed a cancer in the radiology scan. Now imagine getting
Yeah.
those kind of programs that you could get involved in. So the ability of a platform to be able to provide the diversity of clients, the incredible diverse nature of projects, having the ability to create in areas of skills that you already have, and of course, at the end of the day, get paid for it. That works really well.
Because that's really that's the fundamental question, that you
Right.
have such a large, you have the scale of the kind you said, 1.6 million, but it takes something to have such an active base of people.
Right.
And in the case of what you're sharing, it seems to be an element of challenge, of
Mhm.
solving interesting problems, maybe challenging one's own skills
Right.
in ways that may or may not be possible in one's day job. So it's there's sort of a signature, a motivational signature, which is quite different from perhaps some of the other gig players. Like last week, we had a conversation around Uber, where the motivation is probably quite different, and it could be earning part-time money, supplementing income, or in countries like India, it could be as a full-time job.
Sure.
So we're
And,
seeing that.
let me not discount those things, because at the end of the day, the money is important, right? So a lot of people working at Topcoder, I mean, there are a lot of people who are purely working on Topcoder gigs and making a lot of money. So let me not discount the money. And you mentioned why certain um, programs are successful or certain platforms are successful. You have to be able to do that, but you can only do that if the scale is that high,
Yeah,
if the
yeah.
number of programs which are available are that high, and there are incredible number of people who moonlight in different areas. But here's the thing. I work in a job, I make a certain amount of money, which I don't think is enough. And I have skills in other areas. But typically in the regular four walls of a company, you said you have these skills, you're good at this job, you do this job. Whereas a person says, I have the ability to do that much more, and can I earn more in that way? Now imagine, we talk a lot about in work, you know, the best combination is your passion and your work come together and you get paid for it. Topcoder actually offers something like that, which is, you've got a passion in a certain area, you're really good at it. And if you're really good at it, you can earn a lot of money, being on a platform. So I think that level of motivation is always there. And, I would argue that a large number of people make a lot of money. The interesting thing about Topcoder is also, and some of the other platforms are like that too, is that they're very challenge based, right? So you have to develop an output, and if your output is good enough and it is selected, then you get paid for it. It may not be the one which is used finally, but here's the interesting thing about crowdsourcing too. Two biggest things. First is there is speed, because the number of people who are working on it far outweighs what even a large company like Wipro or any of our competitors can put together. So speed, and the second one is optionality, because we actually rolled out, this is an amazing one. We actually rolled out a mobile app during a congress, which was over 4 days. And at the end of, the third day of congress, is sponsored by one of our clients. There were 17 versions of a mobile app that they could have a look at, right?
Wow.
Now, typically as a company, I might have come back with two options. Here's option A, option B, or maybe an option C. Who comes up with 17, right? So there's speed, there's optionality, and you're paid for your output if it is good, right? You're not paid for an output if it's bad. So there is an element of making sure that you have the right output that is being put out, because ultimately you're pitted against people. And the last thing I would say, Shalini, is also there's a level of competitiveness, right? I mean, you're part of a community, and B, you're competing. And I think there is both a community feel in places like Topcoder, but there's also a challenge feel that I'm competing against people, and at any point of time, in that challenge where you stand. So and so has already submitted a proposal. 3 proposals have been submitted, 1 has been accepted, 2 more to go. Deadlines, challenges. So that's something which is very interesting for somebody who even wants to do it for part time, because you've got a 12-hour challenge, and you have the ability, and you're competing against the others. So, your adrenaline is pumping. And I often see people, even within my organization, when you're really pumped up, you provide the best of output. And if you have a platform that enables you to do that, then that's great too.
No, I think you're right, because when I was doing my research for our conversation, many of the posts were about, how far people had come along. I think you have color codes for different levels of proficiency, and, people asking questions around what does it take to move to the red level. I think that's your highest level. How many people from India are at that level? So, I mean, I could sense that there is this, there's a drive for accomplishment, competitiveness, obviously, and the challenge, and of course, then with all of this working out, financial rewards for those who are.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you another question, Milind. You're right. Crowdsourcing has perhaps as an idea been around for a while, but as a term and as a source of innovation on a consistent basis, it hasn't actually been around for that long. I mean, I believe the word itself was coined by Wired magazine in 2006. So it's it's still reasonably recent. It's in our. Do you think that Indian organizations have been able to tap into crowdsourced innovation as much, or do you think there is a cultural flavor to some of what you described?
I would say yes and no answer to that. And the reason for that is that I believe a lot of companies in India, and I've also worked extensively in India as well. So a lot of companies have started embracing that. But I'll tell you the single biggest barrier to scale of innovation. Um, Unlike what a lot of people think, innovation is never about, oh, one person comes up with a great idea, or, you just run a hackathon and, you got a ton of ideas. Ultimately, if you got to use innovation at scale, you got to have platforms, right? Without a platform, you just cannot scale. And I would therefore argue that, hyperscalers are called hyperscalers because they have platforms, right? So unless there is a platform that is available that enables the scale of innovation, that doesn't happen. And I think the advent of platform really has been over the last decade, in a true sense.
Yeah.
So that's one part. Second part is that there is an embracing of ideas, which is happening. But ideas don't come from one place, and they're not culturally bound. Top Coder has, we do an annual Top Coder Open,
Yeah.
which is like
I
this
saw
huge
that.
big celebration. It was done very recently. So we have regional, Top Coder Opens, and then we have this global one. We have 90 country participants, right? And India is just one of them. But the emerging markets, they're developed markets. There are people in the US, there are people in Australia, there are people in Slovakia, there are people in Japan, China, there are people in Cameroon and Ghana. So it's really all over the world. And I think if you have a platform that has the ability to tap into ideas that people have, how often does it happen, Shalini, that we say, hey, I've got a great idea, but what do I do with it?
Mm.
And I think that's one of the things that you need to be able to tap into. And I would say that even for organizations to really get innovation to the next level, it's not just the running of a hackathon or
Yeah.
two. It has to be a process of continuous innovation. A platform provides that, and that's one alternative, but you can actually try and run innovation at scale in different sort of ways. But you gotta be ensuring that A, that there's a scalability to it, and B, there's a continuity.
Yeah, that makes sense because I think we've been watching organizations experiment
Mhm.
with different forms, and as you said, hackathons have been quite popular in the last at least 5-6 years,
Right,
um, whether external in a university or internal hackathons as well.
right.
So internal crowdsourcing, if you like.
Yeah.
Uh, but the challenge, is doing it consistently and having a process where one is able to reach out and tap into ideas of a larger interested community in a more consistent basis. And I can see what you mean when you say that having platforms enables, some of that action, and that makes a lot of sense.
Well, when I was in India and I was running G Healthcare, we used to do this major hackathon for ideas and, medical equipment, devices, software even. And we used to run a hackathon and we say, man, we got to do this again. Such great ideas that we've gotten out of it.
Mm.
And then we said, let's not do an annual hackathon. Let's do, two in a year. And we did get to two in a year. Whew, that was tough, doing the second one. And then we said, can we do four in a year? We said, no way. We can do four in a year because just the logistics of
Yeah.
creating your own hackathon, inviting people for it, and typically it is face to face. And one of the ideas that I give to people now, after extensively having worked for Topcore over the last 3.5 years, is really many of these things have to be on scale. They can all be virtual. We ran a Top Coder Open, and understandably, we were nervous in terms of
Mm.
how many people will participate. But 90 countries, 75,000 people tuned in during the course of the 3 days. Uh, and the world is going virtual. We're talking a lot about future of work in your cities, but that's really where it is. Gotta have a platform. You've got to go virtual, and the ability to scale. Suddenly is no longer that one thing that you do, but it is, all the things that you really want to do. How do you implement that? I think is
Yeah.
really key.
Yeah. And I think Papia, hi Papia, thanks for joining, has interesting comment on that. She says platform is a necessary for crowdsourcing and for the mindset. Are we open to embrace crowdsourcing for our innovation? There's still dependency on hiring experts and making them owners for innovation, and experts getting tired of execution and implementation of innovation.
Well, first of all, Papi, I completely agree with you on that. So let me also not, just say that it's a platform. At the end of the day, we have incredible number of experts who are running even a platform like Topcoder
Yeah.
or Wipro Homes, our AI platform, or any of the other platforms. So it requires an incredible amount of expertise to be able to conduct the projects. It's not easy to break down a project into maybe a 40 or 80 different pieces, but it's even more difficult once you've got the solutions to the 40 or 80 pieces to put it together so
Mm.
that it becomes something tangible to offer to the organization or to the client, or within ourselves, to our own organization. By the way, we've actually embraced internal crowdsourcing, which we call Top Gear. uh, but it requires the expertise to conduct the
Mm.
innovation. So I would not take that away. I think it's important to have the expertise, but it's important to have a platform to be able to scale that expertise. So yes, it does require that. And we talk a lot about innovation.
Mhm.
Aside from the incredible product ideas of an Archimedes or somebody else, you know, innovation is a continuous process.
Yeah.
So you need to have people who are constantly working on innovation, who are working on the incrementality of ideas, because once they all come together, that's when you have a stack of innovation and something that you can truly say, okay, this is really different. So I think it requires both experts as well as platform as well as time, honestly.
Mm. So, Milan, if I just sort of summarize what I've heard you say about what it takes to build a successful crowdsourced innovation platform, I'm hearing two or three different elements. One is you started off with the scale, and to have scale, you need to have a sharp enough understanding of what is it, why would people come, what is it that they would find exciting to stay engaged over a period of time.
Mhm.
And your 1.6 million is a huge number, and maybe the number of very active participants might be a little smaller, but it's
Sure.
still very, very large.
Yeah.
So just this understanding of what it takes to keep them engaged, whether it's your challenges, whether it's your the problems you solve, whether it's the levels of expertise that get assigned, whether it is learning from each other. So that seems to be one important part of it.
Yeah.
The other thing I heard you say was that it requires the ability to know what can be crowdsourced and how to divide it up. You spoke at least a
Sure.
couple of times about taking a large problem and dividing it into whatever is the size that is best suited for
Right.
innovation on a platform like that, and having that kind of expertise to conduct several ongoing rounds, which is what a platform brings, the ability to bring your
Mhm.
customers and the consumers of that innovation along with
Right.
people who are passionate about it.
Mhm.
So I think that's really, really interesting. And I am tying it in my own mind with some of the other conversations around gig, because it's really then about having a great amount of sensitivity to what will keep your gig partner engaged, and using that as a very central idea in the way the platform itself gets designed and the way the work itself gets designed.
No,
Uh,
absolutely. Absolutely. But, the couple of things which I would say, one is that, just the continuity of, the innovation challenge and that is put out. I think that's very important because,
yeah.
imagine, we recently put out earlier this year a contest which is really a creation of a digital app which is going to be used on the International Space Station on
Oh,
an
wow.
iPad. Right now, that's something that people were really interested in, and
Yeah.
they wanted to be a piece of that. And it's not as though we were going to say, "Oh, so and so has designed the app," because the app is being designed by NASA or for NASA. But just the fact that they have contributed to something which is that
Mhm.
meaningful. So I think the continuous flow of challenges, which are really something that attract people, are very important. I mentioned the money fact, and it's important that
Yeah,
people come out there and
important.
see that there is a mechanism for me to be earning money constantly. So there has to be a requirement for that expertise as well. But I think the one thing which we feel very important, and that's where the Wipro and Top Coder sort of comes together,
Mhm.
is and the bigger problem that we have been discussing as well. How do you keep people engaged in a virtual world? Right?
Yeah.
How do you keep people engaged, who might be relatively nameless? And I think that's a very, very important aspect. And, some of the things that we're doing at Wipro, and those might be useful for other people as well, is that it's important that people identify with the organization and with the culture of that organization. So if people believe that Wipro or Topcoder or any organization for that matter, here are the things that are the values of the organization. Here is what I believe that working with that organization or for that organization, whether directly or as a gig worker, that happens. And the third is that it is consistent. And I think that's where culture comes in, and that becomes very important because every organization or every, including gig economies, have
Mhm.
that sort of culture. And it's very important to preserve that culture as well. There is obviously a culture of innovation, there's a culture of challenge, there's a culture of community, right? And it's very important that we always foster that culture going forward. Like, for instance, we at Wipro, we've created what we call the 5 culture habits to create and retain a growth mindset. And I think, our chairman, Rishad Premji, himself has been championing these, and he's done, at last count, 19,000 people that he has personally interacted with, in order to get this going. But it's very important that the culture that you develop and the habits that you develop are inculcated by the people who are participating in that, because that's really what keeps bringing them back. It's not a challenge, it's not an idea, it's not a project. It is the constancy of that. And how do you keep that in a virtual world is a very
That's
interesting
yeah,
one.
that's actually what I really want to ask you now. So,
Right.
a lot of our understanding of culture primarily stems from, cultures where we were participating in physically, right? We
Right.
were physically present in an organization.
Right.
And a lot of what we picked up about the values of that organization was not what was told to us necessarily, but the behaviors that we had the opportunity of observing all
Right.
around us.
Mhm.
And many organizations have, created physical spaces that have also reinforced those values and reminded people. And I'm not just talking about, putting the value statement on a wall,
Right.
but the way the space itself is designed. Is it a collaborative space? Is it a siloed space? Is it both? Is it playful? Is it serious? So, there've been a lot of elements of design which have reinforced, at least in many thoughtful organizations, the
Yeah.
cultural values. And you combine that with your hundreds of interactions in an average workday, right from the
Right.
person who you meet at the gate to, in case you have somebody at the reception, then with that interaction, then with all the people who you meet in the course of the day that aren't necessarily in your work team alone.
Right.
One of the things that's happened in 2020, as all of us have worked remotely, is that for a lot of people, their primary interaction now is with their work team, because that's how calls have been set up. So they
Right.
have a lot of interaction with their work team, a lot of interaction with whoever they have, task-based reason to connect.
Mhm.
But there are fewer opportunities for accidental meetings or for random observations, etc., etc.
Right.
So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts around how does one in 2020 build, and Wipro is, of course, really well known for having such a powerful culture. What does an organization like Wipro do when many of these avenues are sort of blocked away?
No, that's a great question, and it's something that we, work with every single day. Um, so my belief is that the culture of an organization is really the aggregation of all the behaviors that an organization displays, right? So if I behave in a certain manner and with a certain pattern, and then 185,000 people in Wipro all behave in the same manner, that comes across to a person sitting across, for instance, you, as the culture of the organization. So what you really got to work with in case of culture is really how are people behaving, right? And you're absolutely right that offline behavior and online behavior, or face-to-face behavior and online behavior, are very different. But I think the core of it is really the behaviors or habits that you want to display, and that's one of the reasons why we've taken the 5 habits and said that every person needs to be displaying those 5 habits. And I'm not going to go into a commentary of the habits, but let's take a habit like being respectful. Now, we reiterate that being respectful is very, very important in any interaction that you have, whether it's internally with ourselves,
Mm,
within ourselves, or with clients or customers or
yeah.
partners or external forums. And that's something that you can constantly look at, constantly do, constantly celebrate people who are actually displaying those within an online virtual world. And I think that's something that people then start imbibing. And clearly, for lack of those corridor or coffee
Mm,
conversations, people do have interactions, which are one-on-one. People have interactions which are on the phone. How do you come across yourself? That is very, very important. So you can indeed display being respectful in all the conversations, including one here. I mean, there are people. Let's simulate a conference or let's simulate a client situation. There are 20 of us who are sitting out there who are all trying to make a point. There are one or two people who will constantly intervene and interject and say, "Oh no, I want to make a point." Now imagine that can still be okay in an environment where there are 20 people and where you're also self-conscious a little bit, but it's not in a screen where there are 20 tiles, right?
mm,
So you have to be able to display the fact that you're being respectful. You have to communicate in that way, and you have to constantly do it. So we try and celebrate each of those. So the other one is always communicating, which is very, very important. For leaders to be displaying that traits with people who work in their teams, people who work in the gig economy, for people who are working as contract workers, for people who are working on client locations or offshore. How much are you communicating? How much are you talking about where you are, where the business is, and honestly, where you personally are? When I talk about, here's what I'm feeling, it's taken in a very different light by my team members or by my clients than otherwise. And therefore, making sure that you're always communicating is a habit that you can inculcate. So I believe that there are two aspects of it. One, ensure that the habits that you find are core to the organization, of who the organization believes it is, are constantly communicated. And the second one is that you have to simulate the non-transactional uh, patterns that you do in a normal way, right? So there has to be R&R. There has to be some fun at work. We recently had a program where people were displaying their other skills. Some people put in a dance performance, and some people gave a snippet of singing. I think it's very important in today's virtual world to be actually recreating some of those things which you would, you remember we used to
Yeah.
define it as fun at work, in some places. How do you create that? And there is some bit of skepticism around it, of course, because it's virtual, so it's not the same. But I think if you do it consistently, as with any other patterns, people start understanding that yes, there is a communication, there is an intent, and the honesty and transparency of the intent, I think, gets to people. I think that's one of the most fundamental things, right? How do you get that intensity and the sincerity across to people? So I think that's very important for all organizations to do as well.
Milan, can I ask you a question around how would this translate for, say, one of the coders who's working on a challenge? Would
Mhm.
there be an expectation that, um, say your 1.6 million coders on Top Coder, and that's just one of the organizations in the Wipro portfolio, right? So would there be an expectation that they would also, in some form, be displaying or working within the Wipro value system, or not? What would be
Well,
your thoughts
so
around that?
well, I would say a couple of points there, because uh, people who work constantly with us, in fact, there are coders, there are developers, and then people who are working at that highest level or tier, they actually become architects, or we call them co-pilots. So we certainly expect the people who are working on a number of programs, not working with us
Yeah,
sporadically, uh, they definitely have to show, and display these values. But I think, the origins of platforms like Topcoder, that's something which is very innate. These
yeah,
people are passionate about,
yeah,
how they manage the community, how they interact with the
yeah,
community, how they sort of shepherd the
yeah,
work as it goes along. You have to encourage people, hey, you're doing great. The submissions will have milestones in it. You got past the first one. We're really looking forward to you doing the second. So there is that element to it. People who work sporadically and might be giving in a piece of work or two, um, I would argue that that's far more difficult, and it's probably not reasonable as an expectation to those people. I mean, they might be working for another organization completely, and you would reasonably expect them to follow the culture of that organization too. But I think it's important that the just the experiences that they have on a platform like this, or the experiences that they have with people who are working for Wipro directly, who might be guiding them, those are positive. Those are motivational. Those
yeah.
have to be ones where they say, okay, this is not changing. The good part about a top coder or a crowdsourcing platform is that people have been working virtually since inception.
To start, yeah, right to
So,
start.
in a sense, I would argue that that's not a huge big problem that we
Yeah,
have within Topcoder, because people have been used to this form of working, and they've
yeah,
worked in that format,
yeah,
and they find that there are more challenges which are available. I mean, Topcoder is growing phenomenally for the last couple of quarters.
yeah.
So I actually don't see that as much of a challenge, but I would definitely say that our employees who are directing these people, we do expect them to
Them too.
display those
Yeah, yeah.
habits.
I think that certainly makes sense. That anyone who's either working as part of the Wipro organization, or as working with one of the organizations, Topcoder in this case, in a deeper capacity,
Yeah,
those expectations would sort of make a lot of sense there, and probably the rub off of the values themselves, the opportunity for that rub off is so much greater, right,
right,
than those who are working sporadically. So
right.
hi Andy, thanks for joining. Andy's comment is, ironically, the gig economy and being virtual is more real than the traditional brick and mortar models. Interesting. COVID-19 has only advanced the speed of this process change exponentially. That's
I
an
would,
interesting
I
one.
would, I would tend to agree with that. And I think we mentioned this in the past, but over 35% of the employee base in the U.S. is actually um, in the gig economy, and the expectation by 2025 that number would be close to 50%. Now
Yeah.
that's a very substantial number. So people are already, experiencing this kind of economy, and I would argue that this is very real
Yeah.
because the amount that you're working with people like this is going to increase. I would also say something which might be regarded as controversial, and it's a personal belief, and controversial more in the sense that people may agree or disagree. That once people start embracing this virtual model, right, there isn't a going back to
Yeah.
the regular world, right? So, substantial part of the world is going to change permanently.
Yeah.
Work from home, work from anywhere is going to happen, and companies are changing their policies as we speak. So, that change is taking place, and often we've seen that. And if you really look at, let's say, a buyer's cycle, you used to have that typical IDA models, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we all
Yeah.
studied in B school.
Oh, yeah.
But the reality is that that model got changed by the online world because the feedback loop came into the world. So you were actually reviewing a product before you bought it.
Yeah.
So that was a very fundamental change that took place. And I think this, again, is a very fundamental change. That once people understand why were people not working away from home earlier, or why were people not working in a virtual world earlier? Because you hadn't really experienced it and you
Yeah.
had severe doubts about
Reservations. Yeah.
whether it would work or not. And suddenly you're thrown into this pandemic, and 98% of workers are, offline, virtual. Now you have to contend with it, but you figured that during the course of the last 8 or 9 months that it worked really well. So why would you want to go back to something that is not going to be as acceptable, I would argue, to many people
Yeah.
that it was 1 year ago. So I think the world is changing, and this world is very real.
This world is very real. I think the hybrid model is here to stay, and different organizations, based on their industry values, way of thinking, may pitch themselves at different points in the spectrum. How much is going to be face to face and how much is going to be virtual. But
Right.
I think there's very little likelihood that the spectrum is going to go away as it
No, it's not. And
many it's not.
here's the interesting thing. Before the pandemic, we only had a very small percentage of people who were engaging in the gig economy,
Yeah.
right? But during the course of the pandemic, and as they had free time, not having to commute 2 or 3 hours in a day, being able to get out of one meeting and into the other, by the click of a button and not by changing and running to another building, you actually saw a greater number of people indulge in, programs like Topcoder or crowdsourcing in general, because that ability to channelize the time that you were actually
Yeah.
unproductive is now being utilized to do something which is more productive. And that productivity gain is something that organizations are seeing for themselves. And it's not something that organizations want to let go of that easily,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So I think it's a huge difference. And today, more than 1 in 2 people have actually experienced working on
Yeah.
projects and programs which they were not currently working on
Mm.
as part of their organizations before. So organizations themselves have to start looking at, and I'm not necessarily talking about crowdsourcing and gig economy here, but how do you make sure that the latent skill sets and capabilities and passions which are there in within the people in your organization, there is a way to tap into that skill set and the passion and be able to get something productive out of it, which is outside of the norms that you've created for particular job descriptions. I think that's something that we're seeing for ourselves, and that's something that is bound to explode even once the pandemic recedes.
So, are you saying, Milan, if I understand you correctly, so just as platforms like Topcoder manage to tap into people's skills, talents, energy, effort, time that
Right.
beyond their regular job, uh, are you saying that your organization and perhaps many other organizations are also seeing how they can tap into some of that over and above the role?
Oh,
I hope.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And I'll give you a very real example in the IT services world. Most people in the IT services world are, and most of the people who are delivering are considered to be primarily one skill set, right?
Yeah.
So you're an analytics person. You're a person who works on Java. You're a person who has Adobe skills. You're a person who is a developer, etc. Right? Or you're in cybersecurity. What we've started realizing even prior to pandemic is that there are people who have two skills, and we cannot box them into that particular skill set, because if they get an opportunity which may be outside of the organization to leverage their second skill sets, then they will absolutely go ahead and do it, right? So we've started realizing that the multi-skilled world which is out there, you have to be able to capture those skill sets of people and be able to offer them optionality to work on that second skill set. So just as we have Top Coder, which is more for external clients, we've actually got a Top Coder version now for internal Wipro employees. And so internal Wipro employees have the ability to go on the internal Top Coder platform and vie for projects which may be in their skill set or might be outside of their skill set too.
How's
And we've
that
seen an
playing out?
incredible, it's an incredible opportunity that we are tapping into. Today we already have a significant percentage of our application development work, which is done on this internal platform called Top Gear. So people are actually contributing more than what their jobs are in the time that they might have free. And we understood over a period of time, this not just the people who are got some additional time, but people are on the bench at times,
Yeah.
right? And they might be at any place in the world, but through a Top Gear challenge, you can actually leverage the time on the bench to get paid for a job that you were not doing. Now, this obviously causes some amount of heartburn to our HR leader, but we were able to, as a leadership team, convince ourselves that, hey, listen, if this person is not working on our own internal platform and we're not paying that person can surely go and work on an external platform and get paid for it. Why wouldn't you have your own people get paid to do work that would benefit your own organization?
Yeah. I
So
think
it is
the
an
whole,
interesting conundrum.
yeah, it's an interesting one because I think and I'm sure you are already exploring this because the whole dynamic will be whether employees feel they have an option and whether that's a remunerative option, like if they do go beyond whatever is their expected role, is there something in it for them additionally? And
But here's something, Shalini, that happens a lot, right? I mean, when you launch a product, as an example, let's go in a consumer world, you often launch a product that is going to cannibalize another product.
yeah,
And many organizations don't do it because they say, oh gosh, we're going to cannibalize the second product. But the reality is that the competition might launch
yeah,
something that would anyway take away market share from the first product. So I think it's important that you cannibalize your own product because you can do it in a manner, a mechanism that you have control of, and you still, gain the fruits of that market
right.
share. It's very similar here. If I have some people who are free, who have a skill set that is available, should I tap into that skill set and pay them for it? Or should they go and do that for somebody else and get paid for it? Right?
Yeah.
So, it was a problem, but we solved it. And we solved it realizing fully that it is our duty to make sure that the innate skill sets, passion, and potential that exists in the organization needs to be rewarded. And it cannot be within the paradigm of a job description that you've described earlier, right? So that's a change that is taking
That's a
place. And,
change. I know roles themselves have actually, and I know that's a whole other conversation, but
yes,
the fluidity of roles,
yes,
that we are expecting to see over the next few years is very different from anything that organizations have sort of structured themselves with in the past. So I
right.
do realize we're coming to the end of our time, Milan, but one quick last question.
Mhm.
Many of Wipro's employees work on projects with external clients.
Right.
How do you get them to be good brand stewards?
Oh, well, that's in fact, one of the habits that we're talking about is being a steward. And we've clearly articulated what being a steward means. What are the do's? What are the don'ts? And I think it's being reiterated over and over and over again. At the end of the day, what we want is for organizations externally to view Wipro as what we are. We talk about Wipro empowers a resilient future, right? So we're working on innovation, on thought leadership, as well as ensuring that we have quality of work output and the ability to deliver on promise. How do we make sure that those aspects that Wipro is known for are constantly communicated? So things within the stewardship could be, passing on leads from one program to the other. It may have nothing to do with you, but enabling your colleagues, as an example. I'm just
Mhm.
taking a small example. I believe that anything around culture is typically repetitive behaviors. As long as we are able to ensure that those repetitive behaviors take place, people are constantly recognized and rewarded for it. And honestly, sometimes people who are not, do get a little rap on the knuckles. Um, I believe that that can be furthered in a very, very productive manner. You just multiply those sets of behaviors with 185,000 people, and you get a culture of an organization which is truly great. So that's my belief, and that's the organization's belief. So we feel very strongly and passionately about it. Whether it's the real world or whether it's the virtual world, these things always hold good.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Milan. I think I'm taking away several insights, right from what does it take for crowdsourced innovation to work successfully, to what does it take to have a large community that is connected, active, engaged with the organization. What's the kind of rub off of an organization's values on this community? What are the expectations around that? And then the organization's own expectations from remote working employees, particularly those who are working in locations, you know, which are client locations. So, um, several insights there. Thank you
I didn't
so
realize
much.
we discussed so much. It
We
was so
did.
engaging. Thank you for having me on the show, and it was just a scintillating conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Milan. Thank you.
Uh,
So I hope you really enjoyed the conversation today. And if you did, feel free to share our conversation on your LinkedIn page and tag friends and colleagues who you think might be interested in some of the ideas. Crowdsourced innovation, the gig economy, remote working, they're all very complex issues which all organizations, either today or tomorrow, are going to have to grapple with. And Milan gave us a lot of insights on how Wipro is doing a good job of that. I think the top coder examples were particularly interesting because it's such a leading organization in this particular field. And if you liked today's conversation, do check out our other 22 conversation on Uncube's website. There is such a wide variety. I'm sure you'll find several that you're interested in, and keep following this series of conversations. Our next conversation is next week on the 22nd, and we're going to look at the performance management revolution once again through a case study of how one large organization adopted some of these changes, what they learned in the process, and what are some of the revisions that they have made to the performance management shifts that they had introduced. So, with that, thank you so much for joining today, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye for now.